Hi everyone from Giaco. After living over a decade in Finland, I decided to help building a bridge between the English-speaking people living in Finland and the local community. Listen to my podcast to discover the most interesting and incredible people from Finland and to dig into Finnish culture and controversial issues that impact all of us in our daily life. And now sit back and enjoy listening. Bye! Hi everyone. The following is a conversation with Paavo Teittinen. He is an investigative journalist working for the Helsinki Sanoma, and he has won the prize for Best Journalist in 2020. With him, we talk about few hot cases he has covered during his career concerning human traffic in Finland and the scandals around the food delivery company Wolt. This conversation was extremely interesting, and Paavo is an analytical and bright mind. Please enjoy. Hi Paavo.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm okay. I'm pretty tired, but I have my favorite energy drink.
We don't have to sponsorize anything.
Yeah, I'm not going to mention the brand, but it equals 3 cups of coffee, so it's pretty good.
You will start shaking then.
This is my second today.
Oh my God. I hope you can sleep.
I think I can.
So, can you tell who you are, how you describe yourself, so we start from there?
First of all, thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming.
I'm a journalist. I'm a 36-year-old journalist for the Finnish newspaper Helsinki Sanoma. And I mostly work on investigative projects. I'm from Jyväskylä, commonly known as the Athens of Finland. Shout out Jyväskylä. But I've lived in Helsinki for quite some time now.
Yeah. And you also won the prize for Best Journalist in 2020.
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure what the year was. I don't mean to sound arrogant, but I just don't remember. Maybe I'm too tired.
But I did my due diligences, so it was 2020.
Right. But I did win another after that. But yeah, you're right.
Okay. So you won 2 prizes. This was the Lumilapio.
Yeah. The Lumilapio I won a few times, and then yeah.
So congratulations.
Thank you.
And I'd like to stress this, as you said already, you are an investigative journalist. And that's different probably from mainstream journalist.
Yeah, in some sense it is. I think it's an interesting question because for a long time after I began working as a journalist, and I sort of gradually started doing more investigative projects, and we can get into that in more detail. But for a long time, I initially I disliked this title of investigative journalist.
Okay.
Because there were a few reasons, I think. Because I sort of felt like it was sort of like perhaps sometimes like overly romanticizing the work.
Okay.
Like it's sort of giving this like this.
You're not Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah, like this image of like it's always like super dangerous, and you're meeting sources in a garage at night, in a parking lot at night, and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And of course you can meet people in a parking lot, but I just mean that like the whole sort of popular culture and from like All the President's Men and Spotlight and different movies.
Yeah.
And I sort of felt like it was sort of a kind of like an unnecessarily romanticized sort of narrative of sort of describing yourself. Like, I'm not a regular journalist, I'm an investigative journalist.
Yeah.
And see this sort of small hint of arrogance or sort of placing yourself above others. But then I've sort of grown into it. I think I think it's maybe a useful title to sort of describe a certain type of journalism. So I don't really dislike it anymore. I don't actively use it, but I just call myself a journalist. Yeah. But I think it's an okay title.
I understand that movies they show something that is not that real, or it's a bit like stretched.
Exactly. Like I used to do a lot of investigative articles with my good friend and former colleague Maria Manner, who now works for Yles, the National Broadcasting Corporation's investigative team. And we used to laugh at this sort of notion of like what the movies portray investigative journalism as being.
Yeah.
It's always super exciting and car chases or what have you.
Yeah.
And then in actuality, it was often we were just sort of sitting in the basement of Sanomatalo, our office building,
Drinking
and just,
coffee.
drinking coffee and just calling people. Like mostly, it's just sort of you're sitting in the cubicle and calling people.
Yeah.
That's most of it. Of course, there's sometimes more exciting stuff. You get out, you try to meet people. And so it's not always like that, but mostly it is. Yeah.
But then I guess it's also build up. You start getting information, calling people, gather information, meeting, and you start building the case.
Exactly.
And that's the investigative part.
Exactly. And like there was like sometimes it is more exciting than it usually is. Like last fall, I did an article with my producer and boss Salla Vuorikoski about this Iraqi man who had been convicted for ordering the murder of his Norwegian wife.
Yeah.
And then he escaped prison and showed up in Finland. And
as a free man.
Yeah, and then in that case, it was a bit more like in the movies because we were like actively following him, filming him without him noticing us, and sort of that type of stuff. But also like we didn't do it because we thought it like this is cool and exciting. We did it because like we needed that for the story.
Yeah.
Even though it was exciting. I'm not saying it wasn't, but like yeah.
Yeah. Does the newspaper, or do you have special protection, or are your information about where you live, where you are about under protection?
I have what's called a turvakielto.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure what it is in English, but basically it means like you can't just you can't just find my address like that.
Yeah.
So that's basically it. And I mean I don't know if I really need it, but I just sort of have it.
Have you ever felt threatened or received some threats?
That's a good question. I mean, first of all, I think that if you're a journalist in Finland,
a quiet place anyway.
Right?
Finland is a quiet place.
Super quiet.
Yeah.
There's barely any people living here. I mean, it's like
yes, exactly.
Yeah.
But they're spread around.
Yeah, exactly. And I think like if you're a journalist in Finland and like you're in I mean, I know it's sort of like a truism, but I think it bears saying that like you're in a super privileged position. Because like whenever I go, because there are various, for example, journalism conferences across Europe where I sometimes attend and I speak with colleagues. And of course we have other networks as well.
Yeah.
With, for example, Russian colleagues or colleagues from other countries. And they actively, like many of them are actively in mortal danger.
Yeah.
And they're being killed. And you don't have to go to like Mexico, which is I think the deadliest country for journalists.
Okay.
You can just go like obviously a few hours flight to Russia. Or just go to there was a journalist killed, Daphne Caru, I forget the middle name, but Daphne Caruana Galicia, I think is her name. Investigative journalist in Malta. Her car was blown up when she was investigating corruption in the government. There have been journalists killed in, I think one was killed in Hungary. You don't have to go that far.
Yeah.
But in Finland, I feel like if you're writing about organized crime, and by organized crime, I don't mean, for example, a human trafficking network in Nepalese restaurants.
Yeah.
I mean like people who actively like run like drug trafficking operations, for example. What people in Finland know as liivijengis, for example.
Yeah. The vest.
Yeah. Like if you write about that kind of organized crime, then there's a possibility that you have to take into account
repercussions
precautions. When my colleagues broke the stories some years back about Jari Arnio, the head of the
drug trafficking.
If someone's been living in a cave, he was the head of the Helsinki drug police, and he was then. It turned out that he was himself running a drug smuggling operation. So, for example, in that case, we took some precautions. The Helsinki Sanoma took some precautions, but I think overall, like, it's pretty safe. I don't think I've ever felt threatened in my work. There have been, of course, like tense situations, and I mentioned the story about the Iraqi man, for example. Well, we had to take some precautions with that because he had been convicted of a murder and he had escaped jail, and the Finnish intelligence service considered him a terrorist threat. So we had to take some precautions, but in that case as well, I didn't like actively feel threatened.
I understand. I go back to the romanticizing of your type of journalism. I still, anyway, we are in a day in an age in which information sometimes it's given in bytes and it's copied, and it is, well, nowadays even with bots it's created fake. And a lot of newspaper, they just preach the choir. They just say the same story. They translate from other sources. There is nothing. Oh well, there is for sure adding. I'm not spitting on all the other journalists, but it sounds to me anyway like an old-fashioned, more solid type of journalism where you can trust. Because there is a lot of work behind. So in my head, I still consider it as a purer form of art. I get what you're saying, and I think that like you can call it investigative journalism, or you can just call it like thoroughly done journalism. Like I don't really care about the label that much, but I think what's sort of common to that type of journalism is what you refer to, which is that you try to go deeper. You try to go beneath the surface. You try to find out all the information. You try to find out stuff that hasn't come to light. I think one way of sort of defining or looking at what that type of journalism can be is that you can ask yourself the question of like, if it wasn't for this story, would that information have come to light? Because often, like, I used to work many years in the politics and economics desk, which I really liked, and I still write about politics. But I was also like in the fast news cycle, and oftentimes we had big scoops about things that they would have come to light anyway. Sometimes maybe within hours or even minutes. And I think that's important work. I did it for many years, still sometimes do it. And we need that sort of, we're in the news business, right? We want to break news. But then there are also the type of stories that like, if they're not done, then it's possible that stuff never comes to light. And you have to dig further to get those.
Exactly,
And probably also the impact of this news, it's wider and much more spread.
I think generally, generally speaking, yes. And I think it's just like it takes time, and you have to be in a position where you're able to do it, and also it takes patience, a certain attitude. It's not always like, we talk about investigative projects, but they're not always like super long. They can also be like sort of faster. So I think the one way of also framing it is that you can do that type of journalism very fast sometimes, but it's more about the sort of the attitude of like
the approach.
Yeah, exactly. Approach is a better word, of like digging deeper and sort of trying to get at the real heart of the issue. And a lot of my colleagues do that all the time.
Yeah,
in the news desks also.
Yeah, and you started. This wasn't your career choice. You.
Well, not initially, no.
Yeah.
I mean,
you didn't stumble on this, but
I sort of stumbled on this. Like it sort of, because I moved to Helsinki to study law, and then I think I had a plan of applying because I needed a summer job, and I think I had some notion that I would apply for a summer job at the defense ministry. I don't know why. I think maybe I just saw some like open vacancy or something. But then at the very last minute, my friend who was a journalist, he sort of convinced me to apply for a summer position at this online economics media site called Taloussanomat. And so he sort of flagged it to me, and then I was sort of, waddling over it. Should I apply or not? Maybe forgot about it for a while. And then like at the very last minute I applied. Like I don't have an exact memory of it, but like I think it probably was like the last day and the last hour or something. Like it was super last minute that I applied, and then they had some tests and interviews, and then sort of started that. And I'm really grateful to them for accepting me, because I had like...
And your friend too, flagging you the job.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think if it wasn't for him, I don't know if I would be a journalist today.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm really thankful to him for that. And in Taloussanomat back in those days, I had done dabbled like a bit in like freelance journalism, but like not that much, like really little. Like I think I wrote like 1 or 2 articles somewhere. So basically nothing. But Taloussanomat had a policy of also accepting like summer employees who have like basically no background.
Yeah.
So they just sort of basically took a chance on people. Because like my current employer, Helsinki Sanomat, I don't think they would accept someone who has like basically zero background.
Yeah. But Helsinki Sanomat also tries and succeed in keeping a certain profile to itself.
Yeah.
And it's the most well-respected and trusted newspaper. So I guess that's part of why they have to make a sharper cut.
Yeah, that's probably it. And I think, in Taloussanomat, they had really good people training me and training sort of the rookies who had no background. Yeah. So I would hope that I didn't lower the quality too much. They edited out my worst mistakes. Yeah. But I remember when I still remember walking onto that floor, the 4th floor at Sanomatalo. And in my first day, and I had like zero like knowledge of like what would happen or what it was like. But I had seen, I think it was Spider-Man or Superman. Which one is is a journalist during the day, but then he moonlights? Superman.
Yeah.
Isn't Spider-Man
Clark Kent is Superman.
Yeah, but what does he do like in his free time?
Maybe you're right.
No, actually during his work time.
It's Spider-Man. Spider-Man makes.
I think Spider-Man is a journalist.
Making pictures for the.
Yeah, he was a photographer for a newspaper. So I remember like watching like a Spider-Man movie, and there's the boss is like he's got the
shouting.
He's shouting. He's got the mustache and the suspenders, and he's like
Maybe also smoking a cigar.
He's smoking a cigar inside, and probably saying some horrible sexist, racist stuff.
Yeah.
And like I had like that notion, like I thought it like when I walk onto the floor, it's gonna be like super hectic and people shouting and running with papers and everything. And I remember walking to the 4th floor, like super nervous, my first day on the summer job, and it was like walking into a graveyard. Like, I was looking around and like super quiet. You could hear a pin drop.
Yeah.
And it sort of stayed in my mind. But yeah, it was a great place to work. It was sort of like an incubator. Like I stayed there for 1 year, and then I moved to Hesari. But like during that 1 year, I feel like I learned like a lot. Yeah.
What is the part of your work that you enjoy the most? Because now you've also mentioned the fact that you bring out information that otherwise they would not be seen.
Yeah.
So what is more rewarding? The process, because sometimes you laugh yourself that it's not that fancy as it looks in movies. So are you more in love with gathering the data and the process behind, or is it the moment in which you release it and you know that you are making an impact?
That's a really good question. I think like the reason why I feel like I love this job so much is that like first of all, because I'm a naturally curious person, and I feel like this job is great for that. Like I can write about anything. I'm getting paid to learn about things and write about them. I can call up any expert. You can write about anything from human trafficking to how the Finnish pharmacies work. Like,
Yeah.
and that's great. Like, I feel that that's sort of really rewarding and sort of energizing, and this sort of just how like wide open the world is in this line of work. Now, of course, there's a lot of caveats. Like, depends on what you're doing in the.
You have a desk. You have anyway some sort.
Yeah,
of
it depends. Like what your what your job description is, obviously. But generally speaking, like this business sort of runs on the ideas of journalists and their curiosity, and that's really energizing. So that's one part. And that's also related to what you said about the process, finding out information about new things.
The detective part of the investigative part of it.
Yeah, exactly. But it doesn't always have to be like exposing some, fraud or abuse of power. It can be like writing about like I did a story some years ago about sinilevä. What do you call that in English?
Well, it's algae.
Algae, yeah. Like I had zero knowledge of algae. Like I wouldn't have been able to explain it to a kid.
Yeah.
Except to say, like, warn him, like, don't go into the water.
Don't drink it.
Yeah. But then I was like doing a story on algae and talking to experts and going to Hanko and going out on their little thing where they sort of gather the stuff and try to analyze it. And like that's really fantastic about this work and the process. But then there's also the impact part. And I feel like it's really rewarding, especially if you're able to, I really enjoy or feel the importance of being able to sort of sketch out like large phenomena that are sort of present in our society but remain hidden. Like we don't notice them, we don't see them, even though they're like sometimes practically under our eyes. So I feel like that's really rewarding and important. I think it's hard to say which one I find more
rewarding.
More rewarding. I mean, if you had a gun to my head, I'd probably say the impact part.
Yeah.
And being able to sort of bring out new important information that's been hidden. But I really just love the job in general.
Yeah, that's noble.
Yeah.
And I understand, because that's partly why I have this podcast, to make some impact.
Yeah, exactly.
Then I enjoy and love the conversation and also the pre-work. But normally I'm fascinated about the things that come out and about the fact that I can. When I started the podcast, I thought like, even if one person will listen to this, I made some impact to someone.
Yeah.
And so I understand your point. I think it's a noble cause. Is it so really good to know that there is no now this may be a stretch, that there is no control from the house, from Sanoma, from the Helsinki Sanomat. But how free you are to decide exactly the topic you're writing about, because we know about big media also in America and in other countries that they are maneuvered, they are steered by politicians or parties. So it's really good to know that you can actually write almost about everything. That's really good to know, because it keeps up the fame of the newspaper being equal and realistic and open. Really good to hear. But how open you are, how much freedom do you have? And how do you select the things you write about? How you get the hinge that, like, okay, there is something there. You said there are hidden problems, and you probably can see, because you read a lot, you connect dots, and you see that, okay, something there is hidden. But then suddenly you go and write about algae. So it's a pretty different topic. So I'm trying to picture myself, Paavo, going to whatever, you might have a boss and say, like, okay, yesterday I did something about human traffic, and I steered a lot of pieces in this society, and I put out something that shows something, problems that are hidden and not spoke about. And police was involved, and court is involved, and then now I go and to a floating lab to check out guy. I wonder how you structure your how you get the inspiration, and how do you pitch what you are doing?
Yeah, like when you put it like that, it does sound a bit psychotic. When I did the story about algae, I wasn't. So basically, my work description, or what would be a better word for that? Like
responsibility.
My work responsibilities, my role has changed to some extent, so that now I don't. Like, I probably wouldn't write that algae story anymore. Not that I wouldn't want to, but just like now I focus, like, basically solely on. I focus only on investigative projects. Even though I guess there was some investigative element to the algae story, especially if you consider it in the sort of the wider sense of the word, like we talked, sort of more thorough journalism.
Yeah.
But back then I was sort of I was doing all kinds of stuff more.
Yeah.
Now I'm doing more only investigative projects.
Yeah. But you could go and pitch whatever you want, kind of.
Yes. I think it's like I said, this business runs on the ideas of journalists. So I've never felt. I mean, for sure, I've pitched stories that have been rejected.
Yeah.
But it doesn't happen often, and it's not because my ideas are so great, but it's just like I think
there is a grade of freedom there.
Yeah, and also like we want people who keep coming up with their own ideas and are enthusiastic about those, and of course you might have to hone them and what's the angle here and stuff like that. But and I've always felt like I can pitch an story idea about anything. I don't remember ever being censored or sort of shut down in any way about some topic. If we haven't done something, there's always been an explanation, which was not that some advertiser or some politician doesn't want us to write about this. Some legitimate explanation.
But what you write, does it go before you send? You press the button send. Does it go through someone anyway to double check? Do you have a?
Oh yeah. We have a process for
approval.
We have a process for like challenging articles, which is sort of especially thorough. and often it might involve lawyers. It involves editors. The ultimate responsibility, always rests with the editor-in-chief.
Yeah.
So the journalist never publishes anything, and that's actually, I'm glad you asked that, because I think that's it's a misconception that I sometimes run into, that people think that I just publish stuff, like I literally just go on our site and just publish articles.
Yeah. Like it would be on Facebook, just post.
Yeah, just post. Just posting. Yeah, it doesn't happen like that. Like, if there are more challenging stories, there's an especially thorough process. But just for like any regular news, there's always a second person who reads the article, basically.
Yeah.
So yeah. But
and that sounds, sorry if I interrupt you, but it sounds logical that if you have like hot cases, of course you have to get them checked to understand the consequences beforehand.
Exactly.
Because anyway, they might have a ripple effect that it puts the whole newspaper not in danger, but under accusations or difficult situations. So of course, I guess that you have a legal department checking.
Yeah, for sure. And and I've always felt like you asked me that, like, if I remember correctly, that like where do the story ideas come from?
Yeah.
It's sort of a mixed bag. Sometimes they come from my bosses. And a lot of them are tips that I get. People contacting me about stuff they want to write about, stuff they want me to write about.
Even outsider, like normal people.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mostly.
Right.
Mostly. You mean outside the house?
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. Like I would say, like if you drew a sort of a pie chart of where do the story ideas come from, then there's a certain segment that comes from my bosses, and those might also be like tips that they've gotten from outside the house, and the majority comes from me, I would say, and some of them are like, quote unquote, my own ideas, but I think the vast majority is tips that I get.
Yeah.
Or stuff that I've sort of picked up somewhere where someone said something and that sounds interesting and I sort of want to look into it more. I think it's often a good tell of like, if you hear something or you read something and it sort of bugs you a little bit, like you sort of start thinking like, wait, how does this work? Or why is it like this? Then it's a good tell that there's probably something that you want to sort of dig into a bit more deeper. But the tips are like, there's a lot of them. Basically, probably I think on average every day I get a tip from outside the house from readers. Just today, like a few hours ago, I got a phone call about a tip. Like, so that happens a lot.
Okay, I didn't know. That's interesting.
Yeah, and then of course, like part of the process then becomes, because you only have a limited amount of time, then a part of the process becomes like filtering out what you're gonna work on next, or what kind of like, are you gonna work on some story tip or idea at all? Like, is there anything there?
Yeah, and then I guess, as you said, you are curious. So I guess if it sparkles some curiosity in you, then you get more involved and you want to dig a bit.
Yeah.
Check if the idea has some grounds or the tip has some grounds.
Exactly. But it is a challenge. Like you want to sort of dig into it and see if there's anything there. But then, of course, you have to sort of think like, okay, so like how much time am I going to spend on this thing? Because there's a million other things that I have going on.
Yeah, prioritize.
Yeah. And it's sort of funny that like, I feel like I'm pretty good at what I do for work, but I feel like I'm really bad at organizing stuff. But then part of the work has become organizing stuff.
Yeah.
So like I don't have an assistant who goes through the tips and looks at my calendar and like so it sort of becomes, it's a horrible word, I don't like using it, but like like leading yourself or managing yourself, like itsensä johtaminen.
Like self-management.
Self-management. Like I really feel now that like if I want to be successful, like I don't mean it like I just mean like being able to do my job well and stay sane. Like I have to be really good at like self-management.
Yeah.
Which was not something that I sort of expected when I became a journalist, because it's just sort of seemed like, well, you write, you call people and you find out information and you write. But now it's also like actively trying to keep my calendar clear of meetings, of various stuff that distracts you. Like there's all sorts of stuff.
Yeah, there is a lot of noise.
There's a lot of noise. Yeah. A lot of distractions. Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting. I think it's a really good sign that people from outside, now we are doing this platform in English, so in America they would say normal Joes.
Yeah.
So I guess here we say normal Pekkas. But we have to be gender free, so neutral. But everyone from the streets can just send tips and hints. This is really good because it tells that people are active in a society and they want things to move.
Yeah, for sure.
You mentioned that these things that are hidden in our society, but they influence us. Also, they sparkle my curiosity.
Yeah.
And you have covered the human traffic case. I want to now start to go to some cases.
Yeah.
How did it start? Was it there from an outside hint? And can you take us through the process, how it began and how did you approach it? And let's start talking and let's see.
Yeah. Yes. So it started about 5 years ago. Well, actually, I had done... So I would say that I really started going deep into the issue of human trafficking around 5 years ago. And it started with Nepalese restaurants. So one day I was at work and I got a tip from the Nepalese community.
Yeah.
And basically the tip was saying that like there's this, that it's a desperate situation and there's this huge human trafficking operation running in the Nepalese restaurants, and it's been ongoing for basically decades. It's had hundreds of victims, and nothing's being done about it. And so that was basically the message of the tip. And so then I started sort of digging into that and trying to find people who would talk to me, first-hand sources.
Did you start calling restaurants, or how do you approach people?
I didn't start calling restaurants, but the person who initially gave the tip, like he knew another person, and then he knew another person. And then once you sort of start to build contacts and networks, then you start like you're able to sort of reach a wider amount of people. So it was sort of a gradual process. It took many months. I think the first Nepalese article the first article about Nepalese restaurants took like I think 4 or 5 months.
Yeah.
It wasn't like full time, because back then I was. I was still working at the news desk, but I had time to work on this. But I was also working on other stuff at the same time.
Yeah.
But it took like 4 to 5 months. So it was a gradual build up, trying to find more sources, get them to talk to me. And then in the end, I had something like 20 like first-hand sources and all sorts of documentation, documents, messages, pictures, different types of evidence. And then I also interviewed some government officials and and basically what I found out was that the initial tip had been, to my knowledge, correct, that there was this large human trafficking network, which basically meant that people were being brought over from Nepal, often.
Can you explain the process, how it was working?
Yeah, so basically what the people told me and what I felt like I was able to prove was that for years in Nepalese restaurants in Finland, a sort of what you could call a human trafficking network run by this tightly knit group of restaurant owners had been operating. And the way it worked was that Nepal is a very poor country, so there's a lot of people who want to go abroad and work.
Get a chance to change.
I think it's fair to say that the largest export of Nepal is people. And so there were a lot of people who were desperate to get work in Finland. They paid huge sums to get a job here to the human traffickers. We're talking anywhere from as much as 10 or 15, even 20,000 euros just to get the job.
And the arrangement to come here.
Yeah.
And they would smuggle the people through which?
No, you don't need to smuggle them even, because they came here on workers' residence permits.
Yeah. So they would arrange the paper from here to work in the restaurant. And then
so basically you paid to get the work contract, because then if you have the work contract, you're able to apply, or the employer would apply for you to get a residence permit based on your worker status.
Yeah.
And so they would all fly to, completely legally to Helsinki-Vantaa. Basically for some restaurants, technically you probably, there's this thing in Finland called saatavuusharkinta. So they basically have to, roughly speaking, the way it works is that you first have to offer the job to someone in the EU area before you bring in a Nepalese cook. But basically, if you're posting a vacancy for a cook in a Nepalese restaurant, no one probably
the chances
probably no one is even going to apply for it, and if they are, they'll somehow be dealt with. It was aimed at getting these Nepalese cooks.
So they were following the right procedure. They were putting the
they knew exactly what they were doing, and so they brought in the people. They paid a huge amount of money. Sometimes they couldn't afford to pay all of that extortion money for the job, so they made agreements like, okay, you're gonna pay me. Let's say you pay me 7,000 euros now, and then you'll work for free. So basically, I'm taking it off your salary. A lot of the times, the sums they had to pay were so large that they had to sell their land or homes or other properties or assets in Nepal, or they had to put up their homes as collateral or their land. So they came in here really indebted, with and this is a generalization, because they were not obviously it's not the homogeneous group completely, but mostly it was like this, that they came in here having paid huge sums, being really indebted. They couldn't speak any languages here. They didn't know any Finnish, any English. They were unable to communicate with anyone.
Yeah, so they have to stay in the Nepalese bubble.
Exactly.
They are forced then to stay there.
They're in that vacuum. Yeah. They don't know anything about how the Finnish society works, how our government works, how our rules work.
What rights they have.
They have no idea about Finnish labor laws, what rights they have. They don't trust government officials. They don't trust the police, because in Nepal, officials are often corrupt. And because the owners, who they see as being very powerful people, and you know, to some extent, like they were really powerful people. The owners tell them that I know the police, I know members of parliament, I know the immigration service.
Don't go against me.
Yeah, if you go against me, bad things are gonna happen. I know everyone here. The police will do what I say. The immigration service will do what I say. But if you do what I say and don't complain, then you know good things will happen to you. And so they, and I remember, like for example, one woman I interviewed who was a human trafficking victim, worked in a restaurant and also as a housemaid. She said that, like, because I asked, like, did you consider talking to the police? And she was like, hell no. Like, I thought that if I talked to the police, they would beat me up.
Yeah.
Because that's what would happen in Nepal. So, and the conditions would be really tough, especially in the first year or the first years. Basically, it meant like, you know, 14 to 16 hour work days with no free days.
Where would they sleep?
What?
Where would they sleep?
The traditional arrangement was that the employer had a place where they would sort of put the workers.
So the employer of the restaurant.
Yeah, the owner of the restaurant. Yeah. They had an apartment, and they were often like really overcrowded. Like, for example, one restaurant that a lot of the people I interviewed with lived in, it was like a duplex in the metropolitan region, where something like 7 to 8 cooks would live in.
Okay.
And they didn't have any free time, basically. So you just sort of wake up, go to work, and come back late at night, go to sleep, and repeat. And for very little or no pay sometimes, no health care, no sick leave, no benefits like that, no overtime, obviously. Like, yeah, and that was basically the gist of it. And so they just kept working like that, grinding for many years.
How long that was? You found out that this was going on? For how long?
You mean how long it took me to find it out, or how long has this been going on?
This trafficking been going on?
Well, that's a good question. It's difficult to sort of pinpoint the time, but the people who have sort of been running this operation, the restaurant owners, like many of them have been here for decades.
Yeah.
And I know that, like, I think the earliest, the people I spoke to whose cases had been the earliest ones, like dated back to around like 2006, 2007.
Okay.
But I have no reason to think that it wasn't going on even earlier.
Yeah, because at that point you have to have knowledge already of how to dodge the obstacles, and you have to have this arrogancy already built up. But
exactly.
Yeah. So I guess it was something that was little by little tried, and then they found out the formula, and then they started to just expand.
Yeah, and they learned the rules and everything. And that's like they really knew what they were doing, because, you know, what irritated me was that after some of these articles I've done on human trafficking, some people have said that, you know, that like, oh, you know, it's these people are immigrants. Maybe they just don't know, you know, the Finnish rules. They were just confused, or they have different cultural practices or stuff like that. And
softening a bit the problem.
Yeah, and I feel like if you're filling out forms to the officials, you're handing out labor contracts. Like they knew exactly how the Finnish bureaucracy worked.
Sure.
And they even used it against the workers. And because the second article I did on Nepalese restaurants, which was a year after the first one, that point was really about Finnish residence permit laws. So the restaurant owners would, in a really genius way, use Finnish laws in order to get rid of workers who they had been exploiting. So you had people like you had cooks who were complaining about what had happened to them.
Yeah.
And in some cases, the restaurant owner would inform government officials that they had not been like treating them as they should be according to the law.
Yeah.
I mean, they didn't say that, these were victims, like we are human traffickers, but they would like let them know that, he hasn't been paid legally, for example.
Yeah.
And the punishment would be that the worker is deported.
Yeah.
And the idea is that it's a punishment to the employer because you lose a worker.
Yeah.
But it's not a punishment because, first of all, they get rid of the worker who's, for example, complaining, threatening to talk to the police, for example. And you're able to bring in a new worker and you can charge him, 15,000 euros.
Yeah. So it's even better for
it's
the
even
trafficker.
better. And the new worker is more subservient.
Yeah.
The first few years he doesn't know anything, and like it was a great way to make money and get rid of potential troublemakers.
Yeah. Also, this feeds into the fear because, of course, the community would know that that guy tried to raise the head or girl tried to raise the head, and look what happened to him, to her.
Exactly.
So better to stay.
And it's a small community, so like word gets around fast.
Yeah.
But the whole sort of trick, the hook that the human traffickers have in the victim was basically the residence permit. Now there's all this other stuff around it that makes the victims vulnerable that we talked about, like you don't know the language, you don't know the rules, you don't know anything. You're just sort of living this life of like in this vacuum, in this bubble.
Yeah.
You have no free time. If they wanted to learn Finnish, for example, oftentimes the employer made sure that they wouldn't be able to learn Finnish because you don't want them, understanding or being able to talk to people. So you have all these factors that make them vulnerable, but the main gist of like how they were able to control the workers was their fear of deportation, because everything is tied to the work contract. So if I say that, okay, you're fired, then you're basically fucked.
Mm. At what moment did you understand that you were sitting on something big and it was something remarkable?
I think like pretty early on, I felt like the people I spoke to and the type of things they showed me, the different evidence, I felt like that there must be something here. That I sort of, I mean, I did initially have my doubts about like when I was told that like this is like really widespread and it's been going on for all this time and there's all these victims.
Yeah, of course. They want to catch your attention, so you think that the tip it's like enlarged.
Exactly. And I also felt like, because back then I wasn't as cynical about the Finnish society as I now am, and about our sort of rule of law and the way the police works and things like that. So I sort of felt like, well, like, could this really be true? Like, if we had a thing like this huge, like, wouldn't it have come out?
Yeah.
Wouldn't it have been exposed? So I was skeptical. But at the same time, the people I spoke to were really convincing. They had evidence. And I gradually, at some point during that autumn, I started feeling like, okay, I think like this really is what it looks like. And then it sort of started, the story was published in, I think, the early spring of 2019. I think it was in March maybe, or early April. And then like I was fully convinced at some point early in the year when I had acquired enough sources, and I felt like there were people, many of who didn't know about each other, speaking, describing very very similar circumstances with different types of strong evidence from different restaurants around Finland, from different years. Like the idea that they were sort of like the notion that it wasn't true, or that it wasn't convincing, or that I had some really, really small fragment and all of the other stuff was like good. Like it just didn't seem plausible anymore. And then I also spoke with government officials, like people from the Finnish National Bureau of Investigation, other police officers, and other people who are very deep into the subject, and they sort of confirmed my findings. And then I felt like, okay, like this is what it looks like. The original tip was correct.
And that's interesting also because anyway, once you notice that actually this, what you are finding and what you are working on, it's meaningful and it's real. What did you have to do? Did you have an internal meeting saying, okay, now we have to call the authorities. Now we have to hire people involved in this. I guess that's how it happened, because anyway, you are writing, but there is organized crime going on. So I guess you had to know how to move or learn how to move.
Yeah, well, once we figured that we have the story, like we felt comfortable with it, that's strong enough. I did speak with a lot of police officers about it. And I got the sense that at least some of them like knew what was going on, but perhaps they were just like, small cogs in a big machine. It's difficult to...
Yeah, you have to put all the pieces of the puzzle together also.
Yeah. And some of them had done like really good work on investigating human trafficking cases. But of course, if it's a big, phenomenon, then there's only so much a certain police officer can do.
Yeah.
But we didn't inform the authorities of any specific incidents because first of all, we felt like our role is to tell the story in as convincing a way as possible, and then it's up to the authorities to act.
To do the next.
Yeah. And then also there were a lot of issues with having to do with the safety of sources and source confidentiality. A number of the people I interviewed were still working in those same exploitative restaurants.
Yeah.
Some of them, some of their employers were being investigated already by the police, so we couldn't like name them to make sure that the employer is not tipped off.
Yeah.
And so we sort of figured that if we write as strong and convincing a story as possible, then the authorities will pick it up from there. And I was happy to see that after the article, a lot of the Nepalese cooks sought help from an organization, an NGO called Victim Support Finland. It's Rikosuhripäivystys in Finnish, which does really important work helping victims of human trafficking. And after the article was published, there were tens of Nepalese cooks who sought help from Victim Support Finland. And that was also a channel of like, I knew that if they wanted to then speak to the police, they can go through the Victim Support Finland.
Yeah, that's absolutely really important that they became aware and they were self-aware of what was the situation.
Yeah.
I understand your role of a journalist is not of a lawmaker or a detective or police. So of course, then what's next? It's up to the correct authority. Did you go and speak with immigration also? And
yeah, I did speak with immigration officials for the article.
Has things changed?
Well, that's
we named loops, or we named some the fact that you can enter with a working permit without any screening and without any checking and background of where you go and where you come from. The fact that you can actually send someone home declaring mistreating, and then you actually don't have any punishment for mistreating.
Yeah.
So there are loops or holes.
Loopholes, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, after the articles, after the second Nepalese article was published, that really focused on that one loophole that you referred to in the residence permit system of being able to send the victim home and that being a punishment to the employer. That was actually fixed by officials at the Ministry of Employment and Industry, and then the new law was passed by Parliament. So they created a new residence permit for victims of human trafficking, where in a similar situation, if a similar situation were to happen right now, instead of that person just being sent home as a punishment, he would be able to apply for a special type of residence permit and stay in the country. And hopefully the employer would actually be punished with the possible criminal investigation, and also being unable to bring in new workers.
Yeah.
So there have been improvements with that. And I feel like in general, the situation as far as human trafficking and a similar exploitation goes is much better in Finland than it was 5 years ago.
Congratulations, you made a big impact also in the legislation.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. And obviously the change in the situation is due to a lot of factors.
Of course, it started a process. Definitely.
Yeah, and a lot of people. But I do think, I think it is correct that the media attention was really important. And in a certain way, it's flattering to journalists, but it's at the same time it's a bit depressing.
I understand
that oftentimes you feel like there's a lot of bad stuff going on in society that a lot of people in powerful places are aware of or should be aware of, but then nothing is being done unless it's brought into the public sphere.
I understand, because you had to start the match that then put the fire up the Tinder. It's a fire.
Yeah.
So I understand that you have a big role, but all the problem was still there.
Yeah.
So everything was just ready to catch fire.
Yeah.
And it's a pity that all that was there.
Exactly. Yeah. That's a good way to put it. That's a good way to put it.
Yeah. All the branches and all was there. But,
But
of course,
it's pretty depressing that the pile of wood was so big.
Yeah. And no one was looking at it.
Yeah.
But then the importance of this article and your work, it's that it raised the knowledge to every people. So everyone was aware and talking about it. So of course, then it's a problem that you cannot deny anymore.
Yeah.
And you have to do something. I guess that you were commenting that you are now more cynical towards Finnish society. Open up this, Paavo.
Yeah.
It sounds interesting because every society have this gray, dark areas, problem not spoken about.
Yeah.
But we live in the happiest country in the world.
7 years in a row.
7 years in a row.
7 years in a row.
With the highest suicide rates and depression. So there are controversies. There are things that don't add up.
Yeah.
And maybe me as a foreigner, I can see the society from an outside perspective, and I have a comparison to what I've lived before. So, but I would like to know this perspective from your point of view also, because again, if you can write from Algai to human trafficking to import and export and politics, and you've touched so many bases and different topics, that something you found that made you cynical.
Yeah. I think that's a good way of putting it. And like, and just to sort of tie this into what we were talking about earlier, which is that have things gotten better? Is that like, because after the Nepalese articles, I've done a lot of stories on human trafficking, in various fields, in the cleaning industry, in the agricultural industry. I did a story on how the police investigate human trafficking. And things have gotten better, but there are still a lot of problems. And it's a problem that doesn't just like go away
with one article.
With one article or even 10 articles, or just by adopting a new law about a new residence permit. That doesn't make it go away. And I think, unfortunately, like with other types of exploitation and crime, we can never like make it go away completely. But we should at least be able to have a system where the exploiters are afraid of being caught, and if they are caught, they are like severely punished. So I think this, like being cynical, what I mean by that is that like Finland is obviously a great place to live and a great society in many ways.
No doubt.
One of the best in the world. So everything has to be put in perspective. But it doesn't mean that we are without our flaws, or that Finnish society is without its flaws. And like when I started writing about human trafficking, for example, I had this notion that like I live in this society where, basic human rights and fundamental rights are respected, and if people sort of violate those norms, they are caught and they are punished. And, we live in this free and prosperous society where, most people are well off, and, and I like starting to see that different.
You thought everything would work like that.
Yeah, and like when I started writing about human trafficking, I sort of started to see a different side to Finnish society. Like wait a minute, like these people, hundreds of people across Finnish society who are basically working in modern slavery.
Yeah.
And often nothing was being done about it, even in cases where it was brought to the attention of officials.
Of course, because I'm sorry if I interrupt you, but in these cases there is violence, abuse, so there are many crimes connected.
Yeah.
It expands to anyway. These things are noticeable.
Yeah.
Here and there.
Exactly, and like it's sort of like it just made me more cynical about how the Finnish rule of law state, and the notion that everybody here has equal rights and everybody is equal before the law, and we have a system that protects everybody's fundamental rights, including those people who are the most vulnerable.
Yeah. Or minorities.
So it made me more cynical about that, which doesn't mean that there's also not a lot of success stories there. There's a lot of really good police officers. There's a lot of really good government officials who have been working on these topics for years and doing really good work. But on a systemic level, it made me realize that, wait a second, like we have this side of society in Finland that I haven't seen before. And then I sort of started seeing like more glimpses into this when I wrote about like honor-based violence or how sometimes sexual violence or domestic violence cases are investigated. Like, and you just sort of start to realize that like I had only seen such a small slice of what life can be like in Finland, that I didn't realize that like the stuff that can happen here.
Yeah, there is drama.
Yeah.
Hidden.
Yeah.
This equality topic, it's something that, I feel quite close to me, being a foreigner here. And it's something that, of course, I try to challenge because, as you said, in Finland, there is a lot of talk also about equality and gender equality, for example. That is something that I really appreciate, being open, discussed, challenged. But for example, in races, there is still a lot to do. And Finnish society, it's based on laws, and people like laws here in Finland. And Finns are like German and perfect bureaucratics, a mix of like really methodic and bureaucratic, and good to have laws. It's kind of a maze you can walk through, and you feel protected because there are laws here and there that will protect you. But once you step up, as you said, and you see the big picture, actually it's not working like that. And I come from a society, of course, where mafia, it's a well-known phenomena. So it's again power play. It is working on blackmailing and threatening and closing the community so that you think you cannot escape from that. But our society is also based on no, it's not based, but one of the problem of Italian society, it's trying to bend and overcome the rules and the laws. We are kind of expert in that. We always try to see where there is a hole or a loophole and try to exploit it and that is something that, for example, doesn't exist in a basic Finnish mentality. And then I see that you are like shocked about that, but it's something that you stumble in Italy. Now I don't want to generalize and I don't want to put anyone under the guillotine, but you have also this notariate, so that there are people that make official papers, and many of the people of notariate in Italy, they are expert in arranging taxes, and so they study quite well where the loophole necessary is not a loophole. It's just like how can you get advantage of the laws around you and you get the best benefit. So it is like structured in a different way, and I'm not so shocked the fact that people from different culture especially might think that police is not their friend or that government is corrupt, because I can see that where I am from.
Yeah.
And so I understand that this power play and game that was used in this human traffic. You are actually writing a book about it.
Yeah, I'm writing a book about it, and you mentioned Italian society.
Yeah,
and I just sort of started thinking that like Italian society is a good example of because I had read about for example Italian tomato fields, migrants working there, often in difficult circumstances, some of them victims of human trafficking.
Yeah.
And the experts I speak to have sort of described it as like it's become this really difficult issue in Italy, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it's become so like deeply ingrained within the agricultural and economic system that you have this big number of migrants working in the fields, that it's sort of like if you start to like dig too deep into that, like what kind of a can of worms are you going to open up?
Yeah.
And I think like that I didn't realize initially that we have similar issues in Finland. I thought that human trafficking is something you see in somewhere else.
Yeah.
Like it's a foreign
you
foreign
thought like
phenomenon.
Mexico or something like far away from
Mexico or
not to speak about badly about Mexico.
No, but like
far away.
Yeah, the Persian Gulf, problems in Italian tomato fields. Yeah. But then I sort of, and that's part of becoming more cynical. I started to sort of realize that wait a minute, like this is not some alien phenomenon. Like this is happening in Finnish society.
Yeah.
Like this is right here, and we have exactly the same types of problems as Italy has, for example, with tomato fields. I mean, look at look at Finnish Thai berry pickers who pick blueberries and what do you call puolukka, lingonberries.
Yeah.
Last week, no, I think it was this week. I'm getting confused with my short-term memory. It's a little sleep.
I think it's the
it might be the energy drink. But I think it was no, it was last week. Last week, the foreign ministry of Finland announced that they're giving 0 visas to Thai berry pickers this summer.
Yeah.
They're not allowing anyone to come in because there's such a high risk of them being victims of human trafficking.
Yeah.
And it's related to the human trafficking investigation by the Finnish National Bureau of Investigation, which might turn out to be the biggest human trafficking investigation in Finnish history. So like that was part of like understanding this issue more and becoming more cynical and understanding that like we are so fond of ourselves and we like to look in the mirror and praise ourselves about what a wonderful Scandinavian rich welfare state we are, and at the same time we have like.
And this happens in every day. Yeah,
we literally have modern slavery here.
Yeah, and it's a phenomenon that the Finnish society considers it almost kind of like a funny things that like these Thailand people come and then they pick the berries and they think like, okay, yeah, they can make according to taxes about 3,000 euros per year without paying taxes. So it's okay, let's get them in. So they are, you say sinisilmäiset in Finnish, so you are just naive in that sense.
Yeah.
But actually there is nothing bad under that because it's all according to laws.
Exactly.
Yeah, so it's denying what actually is happening, but it's good if these things are checked. And I wanted to comment about the tomato fields that, and it's the old agriculture. Every time you drink an Italian wine, you know that the grapes were picked by someone that it's most likely different color than your skin, and most likely it's not legal.
Or you use mutti, the great Italian tomato sauce, which I love.
Now I have to start buying something else. I would like to grow my own, and I do, and I did, but the season is not so favorable in Finland. But it's as you said, it's not only the can worm that you could find opening up that lead, but it's become so enrooted also that it's impossible to legalize it.
Yeah.
Because you just can't. You would put out of business everyone.
Yeah.
So you cannot do anything about it. You have to allow to happen. And I think it was estimated that about 30% of the Italian GDP it's black money. So not black because of people, but hidden money. Yeah. So you have to multiply than the real GDP because everyone works with cash and
and it's really difficult to. It's really difficult to also like, as an individual, like you're part of that system. It's really difficult to sort of step out of that system and start to think about like
critically also.
Yeah, and critically, and also like just like if you want to avoid contributing to something that fuels human trafficking, it's really difficult. Like if I go to the supermarket and I buy blueberries, like how can I know like
the origin
under what conditions were they picked? Yeah. Or if I go to some restaurant and buy lunch there, or if like the school of my children is being cleaned by who exactly, under what conditions?
Yeah.
And that's something that I sort of struggle with because a lot of people, they always ask me like, which Nepalese restaurant can I eat in? Like stuff like that. And I get it, like this, it's these individual choices. Or like, can I buy that cucumber from Närpiö, where we had this really big criminal case that's still ongoing. And I think for me, it sort of always comes back to like, we can make choices as consumers, but I also feel like when we speak about human trafficking, we speak about this type of exploitation. It really is, in the end, the government's responsibility Like we, and of course we can make choices as voters also, but like we can't start playing detectives ourselves, you know.
Yeah.
And oftentimes it will be impossible to find out under what conditions this stuff has.
You cannot retrace it.
Yeah. So basically, like we should be able to trust that in this society we live in, where we act as consumers, then we are not contributing to something that is fueling modern slavery. We should be able to trust that, but I don't think we can trust that at this moment.
Yeah.
And the same problem in Italy, of course.
Yeah, and this all topic makes me think about Wolt and the fact that the courier and they are legally they have a legal situation in which they can work, but they were never hired, and you have this situation in which you have like.
They're entrepreneurs legally.
Yes, they are entrepreneur legally. So the condition in which they work, it's allowed by the law, but then again, it's a loophole in favor of the company, and then you have a moral question there behind, like, are you actually providing, as you speak and as you say, like possible job possibility for people, or are you just using a loophole?
Are you like participating in the exploitation of people?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Also because there was also the case that actually this Wolt application and who was using the account, there was also behind that exploitation of human and people selling their credits or selling their certificates.
Yeah.
So that they could expand and there is microcriminality behind that.
Yeah, we did a story with my colleagues Pauliina Siniower and Milla Palkuoha about sort of Wolt couriers who didn't have legal papers.
Exactly.
And who were sort of renting accounts. And
how was that working? If you briefly explained us.
The way I remember it working was that there's a lot of people who would want to be working as couriers.
Yeah.
But there's a limited number of them, so you can't just sign up. There's a queue, and the queue is really long. I think back when we did the article last year, I think the queue was like 10,000 people or something.
Yeah.
And so the way it would work, like generally speaking, if I remember correctly, was that you would have a lot of people who would rent out their user account.
Yeah, because they would get screened by the company, and they would be accepted.
Exactly, but then they would sell it on.
Exactly.
They would allow other people to use it for money.
Yeah,
and you had a lot of people who didn't have papers here.
Yeah.
Driving the food or doing the courier work.
Yeah, and doing multiple shifts under the same account. So you would have organized few people behind you, like in line, and they would just work constantly.
And there were also questions of like, was the person who was renting who was sort of doing the actual career work, like how much were they getting from the payment, and how much was going to the original holder of the account?
Yeah. That's a pyramid scheme.
Pyramid scheme, and a risk of an exploitative scheme where the person who's actually doing the work is getting a really small amount of the money.
Yeah.
But they're accepting that because they, are able to get some money, and then they're not able to get their own account, so they pay other people who have already gotten their account. And also, it's just a general question of like, are there a lot of people without legal papers driving around?
You crash with someone.
Driving around carrying food to people. And it's sort of, there's different sort of facets to that issue. And there were also some criminal investigations. We also discussed the other career service, Foodora, in the article. There was one human trafficking investigation concerning the food careers. there were a few criminal investigations concerning various types of exploitation regarding food careers in these companies, Wolt and Foodora. The companies themselves or any representatives of them, or meaning people who are employed by them, they were not implicated. So just to make it clear that they were not suspected of being involved in any criminal activity. But it was sort of like what happened at the grassroots level.
Yeah.
And that's a really interesting question. I mean, I think what you said earlier about like how should we approach, for example, food careers and their situation, because I don't think it's a black and white issue. I know some food careers who feel like first of all, they're unable to get a job anywhere else.
Yeah.
That there's a lot of racism and biases that prevent them from getting a job. That they're able to, that they enjoy the entrepreneur status that they have, the freedom they have. They can log on whenever they want. They don't have any at least in they don't have any shifts. Foodora actually, I think, does have some shifts, but you can choose. But yeah, you're able to sort of work freely and when you want and earn some money. And it's hard work and you have to earn a lot, but work a lot. But if you're able to work a lot, if there's not too many careers which would push down your wages or your earnings, then you're also able to earn decent money from it.
Yeah.
So it's not a black and white issue, but I think you posed a very important question of like how should we approach this and what does this say about the Finnish labor market? Like why are all these people unable to become employed elsewhere?
Yeah, and this is the equality that it's so claimed and so spoken about. Where is it?
Yeah, exactly. It's another issue of like the Finnish society is not as great as we sometimes make it out to be. It is great in many ways, but it's not as great as we sometimes make it out to be. And it's not just food careers. I mean, obviously, it extends to a lot of different professions or jobs that are often precarious and pay low wages. I mean, I've spoken with like cleaners, for example, cleaners who have master's degrees or PhDs in various fields, unable to find any jobs, any other jobs in Finland. I remember I spoke to one food courier from Wolt who I think he said he has a PhD in physics from a Finnish university.
Yeah.
I think he was from Pakistan, and he couldn't find any work.
Yeah.
So it's like we can criticize the food career companies, but at the same time, and I have in the articles, we have been very critical also. But at the same time, you have to admit that like they do give a lot of people an ability to earn money.
Yeah.
And some people would prefer that work to, for example, working as a cleaner. So it's not a black and white issue, but it's a really important and difficult issue.
As long as the main problem, that this equality of opportunity is not there.
Yeah.
As long as that topic is not forgotten, because then easily it's, again, if you want to deny the problem, you can hide behind the fact that we are giving work for these people, but actually they are not doing what they could do. And the equality of opportunity is something that I think it's pretty basic and everyone should have.
Exactly. And it doesn't take away from the company's responsibility of like, just because, like, roughly speaking, just because these people don't have any other opportunities and you are like
the saver.
You're not, it doesn't like abscond you of your responsibility to treat people right.
fairly.
just because you know are giving them a job that they're unable to find elsewhere. Because if that was the logic, then you could say that like any improvement in their situation would be acceptable. So why even pay them this much? Like pay them half of that. Like it's logically, I don't think it's a good argument. Just that like we give them a job, no one else does. So why are you criticizing us about this and this and this? Like it doesn't work like that.
Yeah, I'm really happy that someone like you is doing this kind of job, and I'm really happy that Helsinki Sanoma has given you and gives this platform to raise problems all around, from algae to human traffic.
Algae is serious also. Like you swim in that, like it can.
It ruined a lot of my summer. So
it is serious. Yeah, and you can get a rash, and I think it's actually dangerous for kids.
Yes, and I used to have dogs, and also they cannot drink, and it's difficult to say to a dog, "Don't drink when it's hot."
Yeah, exactly. They don't understand the concept of algae.
No, not really. But it should smell, so maybe they should notice. Paavo, thank you. Give us some few nice words, even if you're cynical and you've seen the society in this way. I think you are making an impact. We spoke about it. But some good words to finish, where you see Finnish society, you see your work, and you frame this into a positive outcome and in a positive development.
Well, I think. Well, I'll begin with the obvious. I think that all in all, Finland it's a really good place to live in.
I agree.
Yeah, and I think it's important to keep that in mind, because if you lose a sense of proportion, then you sort of really start to get lost. Having said that, that doesn't give us an excuse to sort of shut our eyes to the real problems or issues in Finnish society. I think there's lots of reasons to be optimistic, which sort of flow from the fact that you see in a lot of cases a situation where there's a lot of people who are working to tackle various issues, and it can be quite laborious, it can take time, it can be tough, but then things improve. So I think it's important to sort of perhaps to derive energy from that.
Yeah.
But also at the same time, and I promise I'm going to end on a positive note, but I have to say that I don't believe in this sort of, this enlightenment notion of progress, that everything will just keep getting better with time, and that we are sort of like marching towards a better world every day. I don't think that that's true. I don't think it's inevitable. There are setbacks also, and you can see that in many fields. But yeah, I'll just end on a positive note by saying that I feel like in Finland, because we live in a free country, we are able to impact a lot of things. If you care about something, whether it's algae or human trafficking or something else, no matter what role you're in, you have, some impact on things through various channels, because we live in a free democratic society. And I think that that's something important to hold on to.
It's really valuable.
To not feel like apathetic about stuff and feel like there's nothing you can do, or there's always something you can do.
Yeah.
Even though it might be really small.
Or sending a tip to you to
investigate. You can always send a tip to me. Yeah, exactly. I think that's a good place to end it. You can always send a tip to me, and I'll look into it.
Thank you. It was a really interesting chat, and thank you so much.
Thanks so much for having me. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Yes, bye.